Hello, I am Sushant Gupte on behalf of World Pharma Today, and welcome to yet another intriguing session, this time around on tech and pharmaceuticals. I have with me Mr. Edward Bartels, the Associate Director for Solution Engineering with IQVIA. So, without much ado, I would like our esteemed guest to introduce himself, his organization, and his expertise before we get on to the questions. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Dushyant. Thanks, everyone, today. Again, my name is Edward Bartels, Associate Director of Solution Engineering here at IQVIA, the world's leading CROs. Specifically, I work in our digital product solutions team around our digital products we instance in clinical trials worldwide. These consist of our ECOA platform for electronic assessment completion and data collection, our IRT platform, patient randomization screening and dosing, e-consent platforms, and other associated technologies. I myself have around 10 years in the ECOA landscape, specifically across operations, training, and other elements of ECOA implementation across a variety of therapeutic areas. And I've been with IQVIA for around 5 years. And today, I'm going to be happy to answer some questions around our ECOA solution, wearable solutions, our health kit integration with ECOA, and kind of whatever else we get talking to. So happy to be here.
Likewise, Ed. So we'll begin now. Can you describe IQVIA's strategic approach so as to integrate digital health technologies, especially when we talk of wearables, into the clinical research ecosystem?
Sure thing. So to kind of start at a high level, what we do at IQVIA from a technology perspective really aims to consolidate all elements of the clinical trial process in a digital format. So I know I brought up our ECOA system, that's electronic clinical outcome assessments for data collection digitally, our IRT platforms for digital, again, randomization, screening, dispensation, our e-consenting, and our connected devices team that actually works to source out these wearable devices globally depending on study needs and overall market trends. What we do at IQVIA is source and instance all these technologies in-house to then really reinforce our broader clinical strategy. So really when we look at an opportunity and we're looking at how we can best support management for, let's say, a very large phase 3 trial across multiple regions of the world, we're looking at how our technologies can be best suited, not just on a kind of almost vendor-specific technology by technology approach, but how they integrate with each other. So one example of this would be our integrations between our IRT, e-consent, and ECOA platforms. An example of which would be consenting a participant, having them go through steps in the IRT platform of getting screened and randomized, and then guiding sites and dispensation, and then all the way through the actual COA administration, so collecting endpoint data. If there's connected devices involved in such a trial, we might even have those sourced for elements at the site, such as spirometry, or let's say a heart rate monitor worn at home. So really our approach is to consolidate those technologies together and really give that in-house provisioning of services for whichever technologies are needed. Each of these technologies can be leveraged individually, but the strength, I'd say, comes from the integration between the technologies. And I might answer your question if you have one around kind of implementation, might go more into it, but a bit here around implementation is that we also work to kind of operationalize the processes and align them internally. So when I mention our ECOA system, mention our wearables, our connected devices team, our IRT teams, they each work with a set of steps of how they source requirements, can progress through design and development, progress through testing, user acceptance testing and validation, all the way through release. So you not only kind of end up with that integrated approach in production, but an aligned development process, which as all of us know from just working with technology, from the requirement stage to the testing, it can get very cumbersome and very, there's a lot of voices in the room. So that's one thing we try to align on.
Great. So how does IQVIA differentiate its wearable data solutions from other clinical research organizations in this very fast evolving space?
Yeah, great question. So with our wearable team, it all starts again from that global approach. So our connected devices team at IQVIA really is constantly scanning the horizon to ensure that we're taking into account kind of broad market trends or broad trends in the industry across what wearable devices be issued with trial. We go back 4 or 5 years to when COVID-19 trials were everywhere as that was affecting the world. Through now, we're looking at kind of an influx of obesity, type 2 diabetes trials. our team's constantly, again, kind of scanning that reality to ensure that we have the devices on hand and are investigating those devices to provide the best recommended fit for a particular trial. In addition to that, we abide by a device agnostic process, meaning that we will kind of source those devices as needed, depending on the needs of that trial, which we'll do a kind of a triage for. Some considerations our wearables team or connected devices team takes into account will be things such as, again, first and foremost, protocol fit, need. What's the use case? In addition to then patient elements. So what's the patient population or participant population going to be globally? Where are they located? And what's the geographic extent? As well as what's the therapeutic area? We'll also consider elements such as, of course, kind of global compliance rates and what the intended endpoint strategy is, plus any regulatory impacts. And all of that circles back to that constant horizon scanning of operating in this very flexible, let me say flexible probably a lot today, device agnostic mentality to make sure we're kind of scanning for those updates and then looking at protocols specifically and ensuring that we take into account those elements, again, whether it's the participant experience, global regulatory adherence, geographic extent for device sourcing, and so forth. And then, and additionally to that, what our connected devices team aims to do is once we've dialed that in, once we have a protocol-specific strategy, is really start from the beginning. We will provide protocol recommendations and protocol advice as part of kind of additional services of how to best kind of recommend a device strategy. And we do this across our tools as well. If we're considering maybe a COA strategy that requires adjustment, we have teams at IQVIA that are equipped to provide that dedicated expert guidance on assessments or on devices. As that guidance is provided, we then will operate again through that development strategy of tracing requirements, working with an internal development team for any sort of tech integrations that need to be configured, and that works across technologies. So really with our Connect Devices team and with all of our technology teams, you have that first and foremost kind of reactive, adaptive approach globally to kind of what's the need and where's the trial landscape heading. And then as we dial in the needs for a particular trial, we're going to start from step one with any sort of kind of triaging, protocol recommendations, or scale device recommendations needed all the way through the actual technical steps of building through the final steps of managing after the development build is done, just ensuring we operationally manage the trial and provide things such as in-house biostats for our connected devices team to ensure the data kind of is analyzed and gets where it needs to go.
Okay. So what are the innovative approaches which IQVIA has developed in order to simplify the coordination of numerous wearable devices and EPRO strategy throughout global and multi-site trials, while at the same time maintaining the consistency when it comes to the data?
Good question as well. So kind of the two big parts of that question I'd say for you is around kind of the coordination of wearables and ECOA, but also the data itself. And we've done a few things with this. So I know I brought up a few times our kind of global our strategy when it comes to adapting to a regional specific need or adapting to a therapeutic area specific need. From the technology perspective, starting with our ECOA, we do build out a very adaptive, flexible end user presentation. So when looking at a lot of trials that are using wearable devices, they might also leverage that element of a daily EPRO or patient reported outcome or some form of diary that goes hand in hand with a wearable reported data element or connected devices data element. For that, we enable a fully bring your own device strategy for our ECOA tool, meaning it can be downloaded from the Apple Store, Google Play Store, but we also source devices through 7 global depots to ensure devices are made available as soon as a few days if backups are required. This affords us a lot of flexibility in how we're able to ensure that regardless of geographic region, regardless of, again, TA specifics and e-diary requirements, that those are available to be completed when needed to be each day or each week. In addition to that, we also have enabled our system to operate offline and pull down all the schedule or configuration information, as I put it, of how the participant is expected to complete their skills. So that gives us a lot of flexibility in how an ePro or an e-diary on the phone is completed. To the other element of that, as far as wearable integration, we really promote the development of crosstalk integrations between these tools. So if we're again considering blood pressure monitoring, and you want someone to be able to launch their app for blood pressure on their phone through their ePro, they're able to do that. We want them to be less concerned with navigating to multiple applications and more concerned with really just having the least burdensome way of completing their activities and being able to check their data. So we kind of try to source those integrations in-house and plan them from, again, step one, taking into account what the end user will be responsible for doing. Some additional examples of that would include, again, like glucose monitoring, if we're thinking around heart rate monitoring, such like a Holter monitor or some form of patch. For all of those kind of examples, if we're looking at a global trial, you're going to want to ensure that you have that dedicated, flexible ePro strategy, but that the devices that are also sourced through IQVIA for the wearable element are just as easy to understand from the patient angle, and that the two kind of intercorrelate or interact in the correct way. And for the final part of your question, how we improve data quality with this, whether it's through our eSource portal for connected devices data, whether it's through our eCOA portal web environment for our ePro data, all that data is available in a dedicated environment. And we can actually pull in the data into one central repository to ensure that any sort of data analytics that are required, any sort of transformations of the data and analysis can be done very promptly. And our data management teams for our connected devices, as well as our eCOA, they work in tandem with whichever clinical data team we're working with, whether that's IQVIA as a CRO or another clinical data team, to ensure that during analysis, database lock, the proper steps are to pull that eSource data or pull in that ePro data. So I know that was a lengthy answer, but it really starts with integration and appreciating the global extent or outreach of a trial, and ends with how do we integrate those technologies and how do we pull the data from its respective platform to where it's going to finally reside.
It's basically all about making it as seamless as possible internally and externally both.
Exactly. It's about as seamless as possible for the internal development, which we all know can be difficult. A lot of moving pieces. QV itself is a large organization, but really aligning those development frameworks to really get down on timelines to get them down to just a number of weeks, but then not losing sight of that end user experience of we've developed it out. It looks nice. It's integrated, but what does it look like for the participant? Or do they have to access two apps? Do they have to access one app? When they access the app, if their internet dies, can they access it? Can they access their device that they're wearing? And exactly those sorts of considerations we try to put first and foremost, because that end user experience is key.
Great. When it comes to operationalizing the wearable integration with eQua, how do you reduce patient friction, especially for less tech-savvy populations, so as to make sure that there are high compliance rates which are present?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I touched upon this a little probably with my previous question answer regarding like ease of reduction of burden, but a few additional points coming from my background in eCOA operations. So if we're considering the training on a device or the training on a phone of how to use the diary via our IQVIA Scribe app, training comes first. In my previous life, again, I worked as someone in eCOA operations, specifically eCOA training. And one thing we always aimed to do was not only provide dedicated quality training materials for participants in the form of manuals, trainings on the actual applications themselves, trainings for sites, but also tailor these to the need of the trial. So tailor this to therapeutic area, tailor this to device strategy. If it's someone in a region of the world who is less able to access a phone, needs provisioned backup, or a patient population, if an individual is older, who might be unable to, or might be less likely to understand how to use a phone, or there might be difficulty with using technology. These are all considerations we take into play. And that's from a participant population angle. If we're considering best practices of assessment design, we also take that into account as our dedicated trained co-designers at IQVIA. They'll work to take into account CPAP best practices, and they'll build forms, whether it's a diary, a license scale, take into account whether it's on a tablet, on a phone, if there needs to be adjustments for text size for a population that might be it might be difficult to see vision-wise, or again, changing custom instructions for an older patient population. We'll take those into account after doing that triage or review of the study and making any necessary adjustments. And that's usually a dialogue. One element of our platform is it's builds in real time. So we're able to make those adjustments with our co-designers, kind of have a dialogue as to how does this look? How are we going to, let's walk through how this would look for an end user, such as an older individual. Okay, what additional adjustments do we want to make? So those are the types of considerations we take into account. It's all around, in my opinion, training and then the design specifics. So we reduce burden by education and again, by making that experience as seamless and dialed in as possible for that patient population.
But it does take time, right? I mean, obviously make it happen all of a sudden. It would take a lot of time. Is there any particular time frame that you've talked about? I mean, if there is anything that you have in mind on this.
You said, was that a critical time saver or critical?
Yeah, I'm talking about time.
So yeah, if we're considering time, things that might take longer, that'll depend on elements such as translation. So another element of what we do for kind of appreciating a global population, if we have a lot of regions we're localizing content for, is translating and localizing the diary content. That, in one example, adds time, but that results in a localized validated format that ensures you're not losing any of the kind of endpoint collection psychometrics, any of the endpoint collection validity of the data. But other elements that help to speed that up is a lot of the automation. So being able to design e-diaries visually, drag and drop. I've worked with eCOAs before where it has more of your traditional life cycle, where it's more back to the drawing board. It's kind of a, I'm going to say by carrier pigeon, but by email forward, backward of screenshots and images to then dial in the endpoint, the ePro final look. And with our platform, we're able to more visually do that. So that helps to cut down on that time and get it down to sometimes just a few weeks. So to your point about time, we can reduce the time even for larger studies by leveraging the tools in the technology. So that kind of drag and drop design methodology, being able to visually build the assessments, being able to work again internally with our teams if we're instancing a wearable device, again, like a smartwatch or a heart rate monitor, because those teams are also part of the IQVIA ecosystem. But we do have to consider where sometimes it'll take longer. If it's a global trial and that localization and that translation is required, that's going to take more weeks, but it's in the service of ensuring that localized presentation. And that is where timelines, as we all know, are the end all be all. They're so important. We provide that accurate protocol review and that accurate review service to ensure we're aligned on timelines, because we know we're just one of the timelines, even with all these technologies fitting into that broader clinical time frame to get to first patient in and an SIV. So I hope that answered your question. There's some things that speed the timelines up, some things that we want to take our time with, but it's all in the interest of, again, providing that quality trial execution.
Absolutely. Ed, if you can please walk us through IQVIA's solution when it comes to eradicating manual data entry in variable-enabled eQua files, but at the same time maintaining the Alcoa Plus benchmarks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, I've talked, I guess, a little bit about this from the perspective of how we're able to reduce patient burden. We're able to streamline the patient experience. You notice that a few times we have flexible trial design to kind of streamline the whole process. From an Alcoa perspective, I can go through these quickly. We want to make sure that data collected digitally, is it attributable? Is it contemporaneous? Is it legible? And going one by one, our data is attributable as it does necessitate a dedicated subject ID or login or user profile that enables that data to be always associated with that user. That's the same for any site assessments or clinician assessments. This is also the same for anyone who has their data collected passively via one of our connected devices or wearables. There will always be that ID that's associated in the platform. This data from both systems is also contemporaneous because you have that time stamped per when it was actually completed. Even if there, in the instance of our ePro data, is a delay because someone disconnects from the internet, that data will still upload upon reconnection, and it will display the timestamp of when the assessment was completed, which you know is important as you want to avoid that kind of retrospective entry or uncertainty around when they actually did an assessment versus when it showed up. So we can ensure that contemporaneous nature. The data itself is also the original record, electronically sourced in our web portal from the application. That data is legible. We have a variety of tools in which we can properly build out, again, the ePro forms, or we can kind of review with a sponsor, review with the team what it will look like passively from an eSource or connected device technology. And in either case, you'll be able to gauge that that data is the original data uploaded from the device, and that record will be stored in that associated portal, whether it's an eSource portal or our eCOA portal. And then the data is also accurate. We're able to kind of track that data over time to ensure that it's the original record that's displayed, even with associated audit trails. And I think you have Alcoa Plus, so considering those additional elements very quickly around kind of consistency, completeness, the enduring nature of the data, availability of the data, all that is also in play with the digital solution. That data is the consistency of the data record is maintained, and the data upload is maintained in the eCOA portal or in our technology portals. Even again, if there is any audit changes or any data query changes, you'll still have a dedicated record of that. That data is enduring, and that record kind of similarly will be maintained in there, and the record of the changes will be displayed for a viewer. And keyly, that data is available. So that data is available for any audits that are required, both in the form of dedicated audit trail, but just in raw response record. And there's actually a few ways we can display that data and source it out in reports, in raw response records, in scheduled email alerts and transfers, all to make sure that correct user groups are getting the data. So I know I went through all of those, kind of went through the whole acronym, I think, kind of one by one, but that is a chief concern of any digital endpoint collection strategy. More integration between the passive biometric data collection and the more subjective or ePro data collection, or in some instances, site data collection, is how do we maintain Alcoa Plus standards, and how do we ensure that data is accurate, attributed to the end user, and maintained in a secure environment.
Got it. So tell us how IQVIA's platform reconciles potential discrepancies between objective biometric signals, such as hypoglycemic and hyperglycemic episodes, and patient-reported outcomes in order to strengthen the endpoint validity.
Good question. So this is just, I'll use just one example here in interest of time. With like hypoglycemic episodes, there's a few things you can do. With our team, we really rely on a dedicated subjective ePro approach that can be that you can develop as triggered by that kind of blood glucometry tracking. So if you're looking at like 7-point BGM, or you're looking at the tracking of a participant's blood glucose values throughout the day, if you notice there are spikes, or if the system indicates that, we actually have in development, and we are working to integrate those platforms to where there is a kind of triggered ePro associated with that. And that's one element you can do. So you can basically take a blood glucose value and then trigger a follow-up ePro. You can, the key elements here are the building out of a blood glucose collection, a data collection strategy, and making sure the development of that goes hand in hand with the collection of the subjective ePro data around that event. So what that would look like, again, is a blood glucose value triggering an e-diary alert on a participant's phone. They can then access their ePro for that hypo or hypoglycemic event, and they're able then to respond to questions of their ratings of their sensation. With this, though, again, we want to take the patient experience into account. It might not be likely that they immediately respond. Someone's probably dealing with the hypoglycemic episode as it's ongoing, but we want to ensure we schedule and track when that diary ePro is completed to ensure higher data quality. Because even if there is a slight delay, we know when it was triggered. We know when that reading came in from the device. We know how soon after they completed that subjective rating of their activities. And we can gauge those trends over time in our web portal. So that's one way we can ascertain data quality. Same thing goes for, again, blood pressure monitoring. It's really leveraging those connections between devices. And one thing I'll also bring up here from the webinar I provided, if there might be a link with this interview to it, is really just around the Apple HealthKit integration. So our IQVIA COA does integrate with Apple HealthKit. And that's just one example of potential additional integration wherein blood pressure values, blood glucose values, other wearable device values can feed into the HealthKit, and that can be sourced through an ePro. So really investigating different ways in which we can take that objective wearable data and either via HealthKit, via the device itself, via another app on the phone for, let's say, blood pressure, integrate with the ePro to ensure those subjective ratings and questions that are responded to by the participant are completed in a timely manner based off what was identified via those apps, via the blood pressure, via blood glucose.
Okay, all right. So how is IQVIA, IQVIA going ahead and preparing sponsors in order to meet the evolving anticipations of the FDA with regard to audit trails for subject equa data collection and objective biometric collection as well?
Yeah, and I know I talked a bit about this with audit trails, a bit about this in one of the earlier responses, but for any of our digital technologies, when it comes to user activity or in the instance of a wearable connected device data, but also the ePro data, e-diary data, that data is audit traceable to that the ID of the participant in our eSource portal or in our eCOA web portal, meaning that that data will have a consolidated record with timestamps and attributability with all ever-present availability for whenever it needs to be downloaded or exported in an audit trail report. That is something with our platform that if it's necessary for audits or necessary for kind of regulatory readiness, we have available at all times. And that goes beyond just the data. That goes to user activity, changes to data such as data queries, design activity. There, actually in our IQVIA web portal is an audit icon at every level of the system, wherein you can dial in every element change, timestamps for who changed it and when to that user ID and so forth. So with each of our platforms, we have those dedicated audit trails, meaning we can kind of adhere to that necessity of traceability for every element of data collection, instance of data collection, but also other facets such as the design of the tools and kind of who designed what and when, how an integration was built, and then user activity in the system. So who is doing what and when, who is accessing a report, who's logging in, who's data querying or instancing a data change form, data clarification form for a response item. All of that's tracked in the platform and available in dedicated audit trails.
There's a consistent monitoring, consistent tracking which takes place.
Yes.
Great. So can you share instances where consolidating wearable data with ePros has led to more sensitive or novel endpoints in recent trials?
Yeah, I definitely can. So the kind of the big one I'd go with here is, I know I brought up blood glucose a while, but it would be our kind of any sort of GLP-1 drug studies. So any type 2 diabetes, obesity studies, you have the consolidation of many elements of wearable devices or connected devices with a subjective ePro strategy, whether that's a kind of actigraphy device for tracking participant movement, whether that is an EKG for tracking participants' heart rate, whether that's, again, the blood glucometry, whether it's actually sleep tracking, things to that effect. So in a lot of these trials, you have an ecosystem of devices that will cross-talk to each other. Then you have to consider the COAs in these spaces. So you have the COAs, which are then triggered by these ratings, or that correspond to different instances of different periods of required assessment completion, depending on what's recorded by those devices. So that'd be probably my main example. Like some other examples, there's actually been, I'm trying to think back, we have another webinar, if I send you a link for, by two experts of our IQVIA team, Mike Burns, Anthony Mikulášek, around connected devices and obesity trials. And there's just many instances of such as one being, if I can recall, I'm trying my memory here, an actual validated trial involving sleep apnea and a kind of sleep tracking via a wearable device, another involving, again, blood glucometry, another involving, again, kind of site-based activities over tracking participants' weight or body composition using maybe a weight scale at home. So there's a few different examples of this. But with all of them, it's not just the wearable device elements. We're constantly investigating how do we intercorrelate the ePro data. So if we have like a Withings weight scale at home and someone is doing regular weigh-ins, and we're actually able to validate that it's not their pet, or if it's not their spouse, well then is there an associated ePro or diary where they can report any feelings that day, or they can report any ePro elements? Same again for the sleep. I know that's one that is kind of less often utilized in blood glucose measures right now, but when it comes to advent of further and further or more and more validated methods of sleep tracking, we can imagine one kind of for the future where we have more of a dedicated tracking of sleep cycles, sleep phases, sleep quality, and then you can envision a kind of a morning diary that has someone make a subjective perception or ranking or rating rather of their restfulness and any wakeful episodes they had. So those are a few that we've had, back to the kind of GLP-1 studies and the sleep studies. Those are a few we've had so far success with, but there's still there's infinite possibilities as far as what we can track in the future. I bring up the sleep one because I know a lot of people, they'll have wearable devices of their own. They'll have mine on now, but they'll have a smartwatch like a Garmin or an Apple Watch, whether that's tracking health data to a health kit and what would be termed a quant field is how health kit records it, or if it's tracking to the Android app for the Garmin watch. There's still the potential for participants or just everyday users to see their health data, see those ratings, see their sleep score. And at what point do we get to where that information is permissible by the FDA? And then how can we start to track that with perceived ratings of someone's health, their perceived responses of someone's health? So there's a lot of ways we can go with it in the future. But yeah, just want to bring up a few of those, is we have quite a few in the obesity space over the last few years.
Got it. So going forward, what regulatory developments do you anticipate are going to affect how integrations between wearable data and e-coordinate data can be leveraged within clinical trials gamut?
Very good question, bringing up regulatory. So I don't want to go kind of too in the weeds here, but I know I've talked a bit about kind of audit traceability and the attributability being key, as well being Alcoa Plus compliant in one of your previous questions. Kind of a few kind of examples that come to my mind with like FDA regulations. One thing you want to consider is that in the FDA regulations around wearables and clinical trials, that they kind of speak explicitly to digital health technologies. So current regulations speak to how digital health technologies need to abide by dedicated patient and site training to ensure understanding of the tool, and need to abide by a lot of what I presented with our IQVIA Scribe app, for instance, offline, online completions consideration, availability of the device, again, proper training on the devices. And you'll notice that its current recommendations is to ensure that these are ultimately reducing patient burden. If we look about the European Union Clinical Trials Regulation, EU CTR, you can notice some similar wording. They'll explicitly speak more to decentralized trials, but similar sort of kind of messaging, where for decentralized trial implementation, you want to ensure what devices and processes are being sourced for these decentralized trials, so they're not taking place in clinic. How is the patient experience being supported? How are we reducing the burden on them? And what, again, technologies are we including in these decentralized trial methodologies? And another example I think familiar with is the most recent ICH guidelines, really just around just a couple of big points there around like flexibility of trial design while still reducing patient burden. It explicitly speaks about kind of wearables in that context, and you'll notice a through line of flexible trial design, reducing patient burden, increasing patient engagement, increasing data quality, increasing the obtaining of real-time data. And those are kind of the through lines you'll notice, is ensuring data quality, ensuring that there's flexibility and adaptability in how you design a trial, if it's going to implement these wearables, electronic measures for patient data collection, or just be decentralized, but also that patient experience as the center point. How is the patient being supported, and how are they being engaged? How are they being put at the forefront of the experience, because they're the ones completing this, whether you have that in a clinic or have that at home, and whether it's a wearable and a manual entry of data, or whether it's wearable data kind of syncing back to their phone to trigger an ePro. How easy is it for them? Is it something that's going to add burden to them? And that's something we have to consider. Those are just a couple of examples that come to mind when it comes to current regulatory guidance. As to your question, though, around future regulatory guidance, we're going to see. I think that there's a couple things there that come to mind for me. The first one is around AI. I know that's the big word everyone's talking about when it comes to ChatGPT, or when it comes to any kind of general AI recommendation and how it's incorporated with trials. When I think AI, I think two ways we'll have to approach that from a regulatory perspective. One, around the actual upfront design, so back to flexibility of tools. You'll notice COA vendors using AI when it comes to developing forms or translations. And while this is a valuable tool for cutting down timelines, how are we validating that? I know with our IQVIA Co platform, we have AI design recommendations for best forms to use, but we still have our dedicated trained COA designers who operate by best practice to build the forms, but it can help to have a template pulled for a particular therapeutic area. Translations, how is translations AI going to be used? So that's one element where AI consideration will have to be taken into account, and I know the regulatory bodies will have to are currently taking that into account. Another will be the patient experience. Between you and I mean, we can all, I think, agree we have a health problem, or we're going to ask a question, and we could go to an AI chat tool for it and ask, what are my symptoms for this? And there's benefit there, and there's risks there of the classic, you're looking up too much about something you might understand, versus maybe this tool can consolidate your symptoms and it can give you some information to tell you where to go or tell you who to talk to. Now, if someone's in a clinical trial, that's even amplified, because what if they're seeing data from an actual wearable device or just their health kit? And then what if they're also seeing that they're having to respond to questions every day? Now, they consented to the trial. They are aware of why they're completing these measures, but what if they then want more input? What if they go and they enter some of their values and they ask more questions to an AI tool? How will that impact their responses? And then as a final point there, I could foresee in the future, what if that AI tool is itself even leveraged in a trial? So how will regulatory bodies react to some of the first trials where you have a wearable device spitting out the objective data, and ePro, the patient's objective data, maybe a third component where the ePro has an AI assistant, much like a phone might have, or there's some AI guidance or actual automated guidance in a phone. I know I have less experience that with Melf immediately. I just have the kind of the casual AI experience everyone has. But I think those are going to be important considerations. I think that the more we put patient enablement at the forefront, we're just going to have to be careful with how those tools are used, because tools like AI and tools like further automation can be really great for enablement, engagement, because it, again, one of the through lines today has been reducing burden. But how do you monitor that? How do you ensure it's done via a quality perspective? How do you ensure you're getting accurate data from the participant that is indeed how they're feeling? And I think those are questions that will continue to be asked as, I will say years in the future. It could be months at this rate with how fast development's going. But what we're going to find out more of, and find out more how regulatory bodies react to it.
So, if you talk about artificial intelligence, wearables, there is a staggering fundamental changes that they are adding, and they're adding a lot of value to our lives. Edward, what do you think? I mean, this is something which I wanted to always ask you. I mean, what do you think? Where do we see IQVIA going from here? I'm not talking about anything with regards to a timeline, but yes, I mean, if you talk about, say, a decade from now, where do you think IQVIA, goes from where it is right now?
Yeah, no, it's a big question. As I'm one individual in a kind of very large multi-serving CRO that IQVIA is, but I can comment on that. So I think from a broader CRO approach, I mean, IQVIA will continue to support global clinical trial development and implementation. I think that working with our clinical teams, you see the expertise on hand across a variety of therapeutic areas. You see our medical directors working in tandem with our clinical project leads to ensure the most accurate, up-to-date strategy is instanced for a global trial on obesity, global trial in the IBD space, and so forth. Now, how the technology fits into that will continue to adapt as well, to your point on AI. Across our technologies, I brought it up a few times today, IQVIA is continuing to grow in integrating its technologies. Our patient-centered technologies and our digital tools beyond the patient-centered technologies, beyond consenting, IRT, ECOA, through our payments, through our site portal, through our connected devices team, and even our CNS-specific tools and our CNS-specific rater guidance, they're all working to become more interrelated and integrated to ensure that whatever the tech strategy is for one of these kind of far-reaching global studies, that we have the right tech portfolio. It's less about having the individual technology, although we can support studies with IQVIA ECOA just sourced as a direct technology, but it's more proposing, all right, we have A, B, D, E, F. We have these 5 that best fit, and then they can integrate. And we're seeing that, again, with instances of leveraging our e-consent, IRT, and ECOA integrations to streamline not just the ECOA data collection and not just the randomization of participants for complex dosing, but streamlining the entire patient process from, again, initial consenting through screening period or pre-screening, through randomization into the treatment period. And that's something we'll continue to do. So I think it's twofold. I think IQVIA has continued to grow in its broader clinical trial support, but also as the tech element of IQVIA, we're continuing to grow in how our tools react to these market shifts with AI, with changes in types of and numbers of wearable devices, going back again to that device agnostic connected devices strategy we have, always scanning the horizon, as our team would put it, but also how we integrate among those techs. So growing each tech according to the market need, and then looking inward and saying, how can we align our teams and how can we grow these technologies together to present the most seamless solution. So when we present e-consent, IRT, ECOA with some connected devices involved for, let's say, spirometry, but also home blood glucose measure tracking and also site portal for training, it's not 5 to 6 different tools. It's one consolidated tool ecosystem. And that's, I think, where we're going from a technology perspective.
Wonderful. So with this, we pull the curtains down on this very informative and eye-opening session, Ed. Once again, it was a pleasure to have you on board, and we look forward to many such sessions with you in times to come. This is Sushant Gupte on behalf of World Pharma Today, signing off. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Ed.
Thanks, Sushant. Thanks, everyone.